My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 28 years old, and the morning my father looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer welcome in his home, I learned something about family that no one warns you about. Blood doesn't guarantee belief. Sometimes, the people who share your last name are the first ones to hand you over to a lie. My younger brother stood in the doorway of the living room with tears running down his face, telling my parents that I had helped his wife cheat on him, that I had covered for her, that I had introduced her to the man she'd been seeing, arranged their meetups, and kept my brother distracted while it happened. My mother had both hands pressed to her mouth. My father's jaw was set like concrete. Neither of them asked me a single question. My father just said, quietly, and without flinching, "You need to leave this house. You are not the daughter I raised." I told him that wasn't true. He picked up the set of keys I'd left on the kitchen counter and held them out like he was returning something I'd borrowed. I stood there for a moment, looking at my mother, waiting for her to say something. She looked at the floor. I took the keys and left. My brother's name is Derek. He's 25, the youngest, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the one my parents worried about most, and therefore loved most loudly. Not because he was cruel or reckless, but because he was fragile in a way that made everyone around him feel responsible for protecting him. He married his wife, Melissa, 2 years ago. I was a bridesmaid. I bought them a stand mixer and a weekend trip to a bed and breakfast in Vermont. I liked Melissa. I thought she was good for him. I found out later that the man she'd been seeing was named Troy Ashton. He worked in commercial real estate and had been introduced to Melissa at a charity auction 9 months before any of this happened. Not by me. I had never met Troy Ashton. I had never spoken his name. I had never once been in the same room with him and Melissa at the same time. None of that mattered to Derek in the moment he decided he needed someone to blame. I drove to my apartment, sat down on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. I worked as a records coordinator at a regional hospital system. My job was documentation patient intake forms, insurance correspondence, internal audit trails, retention schedules for archived files. I spent my days making sure that information was stored correctly, retrieved accurately, and never confused with something it wasn't. I was very good at it. I understood better than most people that a single misrouted document could unravel an entire assumption. I thought about that a lot in the days after I left my parents' house. My best friend, Carla Reyes, showed up at my apartment 2 nights after it happened, with a box of tamales from the place we'd been going to since college, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for permission to be furious on my behalf. She sat across from me at my kitchen table while I told her everything, the accusation, my father's face, my mother's silence, Derek's tears. When I finished, Carla put down her fork and said, "He didn't invent that story the night he told it. He had it ready. People don't cry that cleanly when they're improvising." I wanted to argue, mostly because I was tired and a small part of me was still cycling through every interaction I'd ever had with Melissa, looking for something I might have missed. Maybe I said something at the wrong time. Maybe I was there for a conversation I shouldn't have been part of. Carla watched me doing this and said, "Stop that. That is exactly what someone does when they've been set up. They audit themselves so they don't have to audit the person who lied." She leaned forward. "So stop trying to remember what you did wrong. Start figuring out what Derek needed you to be guilty of, and why." The next morning I went into work and did my job, and while I was pulling a batch of archived correspondence from 2022 for an internal review, I let myself think clearly for the first time since it happened. Derek had been specific. He hadn't just said Melissa cheated, he said I was involved. That level of detail meant either he genuinely believed it, or he had been told to believe it, or he had manufactured it to serve a purpose. And if he had manufactured it, the question Carla had asked was the right one. Why me? I called my cousin Brenda that evening. Brenda Hollins was 41, worked in property management, and had known our family longer and more honestly than most people because she stood just outside the inner circle close enough to hear things, far enough to say them. She picked up on the second ring, and before I could finish explaining why I was calling, she said, "I heard what happened. I've been waiting to see if you'd reach out." She told me that Melissa had been quietly telling people, before Derek even found out about the affair, that I had never liked her, that I had been critical of the marriage from the beginning, that I made comments about Derek deserving better. Brenda said she'd heard this from 2 different people at a 4th of July cookout 2 months before any of this blew up, which meant Melissa had been building a version of me as a hostile presence long before she needed a scapegoat. I sat with that for a moment. You're saying she prepared this? Brenda was quiet for a second. I'm saying that when someone's secret is about to come out, the smart ones don't wait to be accused. They build the story first. The next day, I called a woman named Patricia Osei. Patricia had been at Derek and Melissa's wedding and had stayed loosely connected to Melissa through a book club they both belonged to. I had met Patricia twice, liked her both times, and respected that she was the kind of person who remembered exactly what was said and by whom. We met for coffee near her office downtown, and she came in looking like someone who had already decided how much she was willing to say. She gave me the polite version first. Melissa had seemed stressed. Marriages were complicated. People made choices they regretted. I let her finish, and then I asked the only thing that mattered. Did Melissa ever mention me specifically? Before all of this? Patricia looked at her cup. Yes. I asked her what Melissa had said. She said you were controlling, that you had influence over Derek and used it to undermine her, that you told Derek at some point that he'd married too young. Patricia paused. She said it more than once, and she said it to people who didn't know you well enough to push back. That was the shape of it. Melissa had spent months constructing a character, a jealous, interfering older sister, so that when the affair surfaced and she needed a direction to point, the pointing would land. I thanked Patricia, walked back to my car, and sat there for a few minutes feeling something colder than anger. It wasn't rage. It was the specific, clarifying feeling of understanding exactly how something was done to you. Patricia had also given me a name without quite meaning to. She mentioned that Melissa had a close friend, a woman named Dana, who had apparently been the one helping coordinate some of Melissa's schedule during the months the affair was happening. Dana handled their shared social calendar, booked reservations, kept track of overlapping plans. Patricia had mentioned her the way people mention someone they're uncomfortable discussing quickly, with slightly too little detail. I found Dana Priest through Melissa's Instagram page, which was still public. She commented on photos regularly enough that her name showed up in multiple posts. She worked at a boutique event planning firm. I messaged her directly, honestly, told her who I was and what had happened, and said I wasn't looking to cause more damage. I was just looking for the truth. She didn't respond for 2 days. Then she called me from a blocked number. She spoke quietly the whole time, like she was in a room where someone might overhear. She said she hadn't known the full situation until it was already done. That Melissa had asked her to help manage some scheduling, described it vaguely, and she'd agreed without understanding what she was covering. When she found out Derek had blamed me, she said, that wasn't supposed to happen. The plan was to blame a coworker, a woman Derek had never met and couldn't easily confront. I asked her why Derek had ended up blaming me instead. She was quiet for a moment. Because Melissa panicked when Derek started asking specific questions. He knew dates. He knew a hotel name. She needed to redirect him to someone he already had complicated feelings about, someone his parents might believe, and Melissa had already told everyone you'd never respected the marriage. 4 words hit me like ice water. Already told everyone. This had been in progress for months. I thanked Dana and ended the call and called Carla immediately. Carla said, so she built the set, and then when the fire started she just pointed at the fake door. That was exactly it, and I still needed proof. Something that didn't rely on what 2 people were willing to say in a phone call that could always be denied. Something that existed in writing. Somewhere Melissa hadn't thought to look. Here's what I knew from my work. When people share digital accounts, streaming services, cloud storage, linked email profiles, and then separate them hastily, things fall through the cracks. Notification routing doesn't always update when it should. If Derek and Melissa had shared any kind of joint account during the marriage, And if Melissa had used a linked credential for anything personal that she'd connected to that account, there was a possibility that correspondence could end up in the wrong place. Not because anyone hacked anything, because administrative carelessness is one of the most reliable sources of truth that exists. Derek and I had grown up sharing a family streaming account that my parents still paid for. When Derek got married, Melissa was added. I was still on it too, with my own profile and login. I knew that the account settings had a shared billing summary sent monthly to the primary email, which was my father's address, but I also remembered that 2 years ago when Derek changed his linked email on the account, he had briefly experimented with a joint address that both he and Melissa could access for subscriptions and household accounts. He'd mentioned it at a family dinner. I didn't know if that address was still active. But if Melissa had used it as a secondary contact for anything she shouldn't have, and if something had been sent there before she remembered to remove it, that inbox might have things she'd forgotten about. I wasn't going to access Derek's account. I wasn't going to try to open anything I didn't own. But I did know that I could send a message to that household email address, the one Derek had created, and told our whole family about at dinner, because it had been shared openly. I sent a brief note explaining I was trying to reach Derek directly and asked if anyone was monitoring the account. What came back wasn't from Derek. It was an auto-forwarded message, a reservation confirmation that Melissa had received at that shared household email, apparently because she had used it once when booking something and never updated the contact field. The confirmation was from a hotel in Asheville, North Carolina. It was for one room. The name on the second guest line was Troy Ashton. The dates were a weekend in October, 2 weeks before Derek had confronted her, which meant she had been actively planning overnight trips, while simultaneously telling people I was a disloyal, controlling presence in their marriage. My hands were steady when I read it, which surprised me. Maybe because I'd been doing archival work long enough that documents don't shock me, they just confirm or deny. This one confirmed. I texted Carla 3 words. I have something. She was at my apartment within 40 minutes. We sat at my kitchen table and read the forwarded confirmation together twice, and then Carla said exactly what I needed to hear. This didn't come from hacking. It came from Melissa using a shared household account and forgetting about it. That's on her. She was right about why it mattered. The source was clean. It wasn't something I could be accused of stealing or manipulating. It had arrived in an account Derek himself had created and shared, and it named Troy Ashton specifically, on a date during which Melissa had been telling my parents I was a threat to her marriage. I still had a choice to make. Send it to my parents immediately, or confront Melissa first. I chose to confront her, partly because I wanted to understand how she would react when the performance finally ran out, partly because I needed to hear her say something real, even once, before I decided what to do with the rest of it. She opened her door in jeans and a flannel shirt, holding a cup of coffee, and she looked genuinely surprised to see me. Then her expression went careful. The shift was fast, but I caught it. She knew why I was there before I said a word. I stepped inside without waiting to be invited. She started to say something about Derek not being home, and I said I wasn't there for Derek. I held up my phone and showed her the forwarded confirmation. I watched her eyes move across it. I watched the moment she understood what it was and where it had come from. She said nothing for 5 full seconds. Then she said, "How did you get that?" I told her. She set down her coffee cup very carefully. Her voice went flat and quiet. That account was supposed to be deactivated. "That's not what I asked you here to talk about," I said. "I want to know why you told my family I helped you cheat." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said something I will probably hear for the rest of my life. I needed someone they'd believe faster than they'd believe me. 6 words. Not an apology, not confusion or remorse. A strategy, stated plainly, because she had already moved past the point of bothering to perform for me. I looked at her for a moment. "You used my name," I said, "because you'd spent months making sure it would land." She didn't deny it. She turned slightly toward the window. Derek was already asking questions. I ran out of time. "You didn't run out of time," I said. "You ran out of people you could afford to burn. And you chose me because you thought my parents would believe the worst before they asked one question." She flinched at that, just slightly. The first honest thing her face had done since I walked in. I left without another word. My phone started ringing before I reached the end of the block. Melissa. Twice. Then a number I didn't recognize. Then my mother. I didn't answer any of them. That night I sat down and drafted the most careful document I have written in my professional life, which is saying something given that documentation is literally my career. I addressed it to my father, my mother, and Derek. The subject line was, "Correction of false accusation and supporting record." In the body I stated clearly that I had been accused, without any supporting evidence, of facilitating Melissa's affair and deliberately deceiving my brother. I stated that I had received, through a shared household email account that Derek himself had created and shared with the family at dinner, an auto-forwarded reservation confirmation. I stated what that confirmation contained: the hotel name, the dates, the name of the second guest. I attached the forwarded email in full, with the original header information intact, so that its source and routing were visible to anyone who looked. Then I wrote one final line: "I will not continue to be the version of this story that Melissa needed me to be." I sent it at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. My brother called 11 minutes later. Then my mother. Then Melissa. 4 times in a row. Then my father. I sat and watched the calls come in, and didn't answer a single one. After the calls came the texts. My mother. "Rachel, please call me. We are so sorry we didn't listen." My father. "We need to talk. Come home." Derek. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was like this. Please pick up. Melissa, you had no right to go through private accounts. I'm talking to a lawyer." That last one almost made me laugh. The confirmation had arrived in a shared account Derek had created. If she wanted to talk to a lawyer about that, she was welcome to explain to a lawyer how she'd used a joint household email to book a hotel room with her affair partner. I read every message, set my phone face down on the table, and went to make coffee. Derek showed up at my apartment that afternoon. He looked like a man who had not slept in 20 hours, and had spent most of that time realizing that the story he'd been told was a construction. I opened the door, but didn't move aside immediately. He looked at me the way people look when they need to say something they don't have the right words for yet. He said, "I'm sorry." And then he said it again, differently, like the first one hadn't been enough. "I should have asked you. Before I said anything to Mom and Dad. I should have come to you first." I let him in. We sat at the same kitchen table where Carla and I had read the confirmation together. He told me that Melissa had been the one to bring my name into it. That he had never actually believed, not completely, that I would do something like that. But she had told him so many things about me over the past year that he'd been primed to hear it. She had built the environment before she lit the match. I told him what Dana had said. That the original plan had been to blame a coworker. That my name had only come up when he started asking specific questions, and Melissa needed to redirect him to someone his parents would believe. Derek sat with that for a long time. Then he said something that felt true in the way very simple things do. She knew our family well enough to know that they'd protect me before they'd question me. And that meant they'd believe whoever accused you before they asked if it made sense. That was the clearest anyone had been with me since all of it started. My parents came over 2 days later, together, which told me they had talked about how to do this beforehand. My mother had clearly been crying before they arrived. My father walked in holding his hat with both hands, which he only did when he was uncomfortable enough that he needed something to hold on to. He said he was sorry. He said they had acted without thinking, and that was on them. My mother said she should have asked questions before she let my father say what he said, and that she had known in some part of herself that it didn't sound like me, and she hadn't said anything, and she was sorry for that silence as much as for anything else. I listened to all of it. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I had spent enough time in the past 2 weeks holding myself together. That emotion had started to feel like a tool I used carefully, rather than something that arrived on its own. I told my father that the apology mattered, but that what had happened was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. He had decided, in a single moment, that my brother's tears were worth more than my word, and that I needed him to understand that. not just regret the outcome. My father looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not a polished, diplomatic nod. A slow one. The kind that meant he had actually heard something. My mother asked if I would come home for dinner sometime soon. I said maybe. Not yes. Not never. Maybe. Because the truth was more complicated than either of those answers, and I wasn't ready to pretend otherwise. Derek filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Melissa hired a lawyer, as she had promised. And that lawyer apparently spent about 20 minutes reviewing the forwarded confirmation before advising her to focus her energy on settlement terms rather than any kind of counterclaim. I heard that from Brenda, who heard it from someone who worked at the same firm. I don't know how true it is in every detail. I know that Melissa stopped calling me after the lawyer conversation, and that was enough. Patricia Osei sent me a message checking in about 3 weeks after everything settled. She said she was glad the truth had come out, and that she was sorry she hadn't said something sooner when she heard Melissa talking about me at the book club. I told her I understood. I meant it. It's easy to stay quiet when the story you're hearing seems like other people's business. It only stops being easy when you realize the story was also about you. Carla helped me repaint my bedroom wall on a Saturday in November. She brought coffee and a very specific playlist she called Emotional Reset Music, which was just Fleetwood Mac and 2 Lizzo songs in a row. While we were rolling the first coat on, she said, "You know what I keep thinking about? That she spent months building the case against you, all that work. And then one forwarded email undid all of it in one morning." I thought about that. The confirmation hadn't come from a brilliant investigation. It hadn't required a detective or a confrontation, or anything dramatic. It had come from Melissa using a shared household email to book a hotel room, and then forgetting that the account existed. Administrative carelessness. The same thing I caught and corrected for other people every single day at work. Truth does that sometimes. It doesn't wait for the dramatic moment. It just falls through the cracks that liars forget about. My father called a few weeks later and asked if I wanted to come to Thanksgiving. I said yes, because the answer was yes, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of performance. It wasn't perfect. Derek was quiet most of the evening. Melissa was not there, for obvious reasons. My mother made my grandmother's sweet potato dish, the way she only made it for people she was trying to apologize to through food. My father carved the turkey, and at one point put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the way he used to when I was small, and didn't say anything. That was the closest he came to what I actually needed. Maybe that's all he was capable of. I'm still deciding if that's enough. What I know is this: Melissa had built something careful and deliberate. She had spent months making me smaller in the eyes of the people I loved, so that when she needed a place to put the blame, the landing was already prepared. She thought she understood my family well enough to use them. She was right about their first reaction. She was wrong about what happened after. She resigned from the book club quietly. She moved out of the neighborhood before December. She did not lose everything. People like her rarely do. But she lost something she had counted on, which was the ability to shape what other people believed before the facts had a chance to arrive. As for me, I kept my apartment. I kept my job. I got promoted in January, actually, to a senior coordination role that came with a small office and a window that looked out over the parking structure, which sounds less impressive than it is until you've spent 4 years in a windowless records room. Carla said it was the universe making a correction. I told her the universe doesn't usually file paperwork that efficiently. She said mine does. I think about what Brenda said sometimes, about how the smart ones build the story first. She was right. Melissa was smart. She was organized and patient, and she understood people's pressure points well enough to press them at the right moment. What she didn't account for was that I also understand how records work. I know what gets overlooked. I know what gets routed to the wrong place when someone is moving fast and scared and trusting that the paper trail stays manageable. She forgot about the shared account, one careless reuse of a joint email, and everything she had constructed carefully over 8 months came apart in a single morning. That's the part of this story that stays with me. Not the confrontation, not the apology, Not even the look on her face when she realized what I had found. It's the fact that she did so much work to build a lie, and it came undone not because I was smarter or braver or more resourceful, but because she trusted that paperwork was forgettable. And I have spent my entire career on the premise that paperwork is the one thing you cannot afford to forget. My brother is doing better. Slowly. We have lunch sometimes, the two of us, at a diner near his new apartment. He talks about what he wants to do differently. He asks careful questions. He listens in a way he didn't used to. I think losing a marriage teaches some people things that nothing else can reach. I hope it's teaching him the right things. I think it might be. My parents call more than they used to. My father doesn't always know what to say, but he calls anyway, which matters more than the conversation. My mother has started texting me recipes without explanation, which is her version of staying close. I save them even when I don't make them. The last message Melissa ever sent me was that thread about lawyers. I saved it too, filed in a folder I labeled appropriately, the way I label everything. You never know when documentation will matter again. The real lesson here isn't about revenge. I didn't set out to destroy Melissa. I set out to reclaim the truth about myself and give it back to the people who should have held it in the first place. The email did that. The paper did that. All I did was make sure it went to the right people. Someone once told me that truth is patient. I believe that now more than I used to. It doesn't always arrive on time. It doesn't always arrive in the shape you expected. But it tends to arrive through the cracks in the story that the liar forgot to patch. Melissa forgot the email account. That was her crack. That was mine. So here's what I want to ask you. If the people who were supposed to believe you chose instead to believe the story that was easiest, how long would you wait before you stopped trying to prove yourself and started letting the records do it for you?